welcome back to our podcast. My name is Delnaz.
I'm Lauren.
Today we're going to be discussing a couple conspiracy theories and examples of disinformation and misinformation we've seen surrounding current events.
We hope you enjoy.
First, we're going to be talking about the hurricanes that have affected a couple states, including North Carolina and Florida, and the response from FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the conspiracy theories and and misinformation surrounding their response. So we've seen a variety of conspiracy theories, including the fact that they aren't there, which is not true. They are. We've seen some theories that the funding from FEMA is going towards international aid, which is also not true because their funding was specifically for emergency response in the United States. And we've seen some other ones as well, but just the initial ones that I mentioned. Have you seen any other ones, Lauren? And have you seen these ones? Anything else on Twitter or wherever?
Yeah, I think what makes this more like this conspiracy theory and like this type of mis and disinformation more in the public eye is their response to it and the kind of the public response from it, I think has really set this apart from others. Like, I don't know if you've seen, like President Joe Biden made a comment about it, which usually like in other conspiracy theories, the like political figures will choose not to address it, but he actually did. Also, Republican representative who represents an area that was like heavily affected also came out and said like, look, you know, this is damaging to the amount, like how does this mis and disinformation actually affect the real like on the ground support that this like that they receive. And I think that's like one of the biggest concerns about this is like actually what's the impact of this disinformation. um yeah, I was curious, like had you like seen or heard anything about like the actual impact of it? Because I find that really like interesting actually.
Right. Yeah. I also wanted to add to what you said about political figures making statements. What really impressed me, along with what you mentioned, was how FEMA officials clearly and strongly stated these things
Yeah,
you're hearing
for sure.
are false. Don't believe them. And they very strongly stood against them, which is very important. And like you said, you usually don't see that, which can be argued good or bad. Like some would say, oh, it's good that they're not giving the conspiracy theory, more flame or whatever, um, or more fuel. um, but in this case, I think it was really important that they did come out and make a statement because it can affect people's lives when it comes to emergency response and theories, conspiracy theories surrounding them. You asked about real life consequences that these theories have had, and I actually recently was listening to, I forget their name, but we can link the sources in the description of this podcast. But she was basically saying that there were reports of emergency response workers having to go out in pairs because of concerns for their security.
Wow.
There are many individuals who think that they have malicious intent.
Mm.
Another theory I saw was that people are thinking FEMA is coming to take their house away. And by FEMA, they mean the quote unquote government,
Right.
which is of course false. And that makes sense why there's security concerns there for the workers. And obviously having to send two people to do the job of one person. And I think it's good that they do that. I want to say that because security concerns are real and they shouldn't be ignored. But that takes away from more people being able to get help because resources are basically being used in that way to send two people versus when they could just be sending one and the other one to a different house. But I think what they're doing is the right decision, of course. I'm not saying it's not. And then there are, of course, people who didn't decide to evacuate. And I was listening to a news report where a person was saying, oh, yeah, we're not evacuating. Yes, there's flooding around my house, but oh well. That was their response to it. And that is simply because they weren't believing what was coming out of FEMA and other government agencies telling them to evacuate because, again, they believed that they had malicious intent. So these conspiracy theories do have direct effects on people's lives. One thing that I was reading today was an article from AP News, and they were talking about a report by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. And this report by the ISD, it's labeled Russian propaganda exploits US hurricane response to undermine FEMA and Ukraine support, but specifically focusing on FEMA. I was reading through this report, and um, it was really fascinating that similarly with other conspiracy theories that came out during very high stress times, there was a lot of Russian X account or Twitter accounts, social media accounts. Some, according to this report, were from state affiliated media or government channels, but I'm sure there were tons of just like individuals as well who were also repeating these conspiracy theories. And we can obviously see that it has a huge impact because whenever you post something like that on X, Twitter, I usually call it Twitter, um, it gets picked up and it gets retweeted and reposted. And then you have to ask yourself, what is their interest?
Mhm.
I believe it's very simple to sow distrust in the government, to start um, and to fuel the flames, as I said earlier, and create more stress. And distrust in the government always leads to internal arguments, tension, which is never good, especially in the time of a disaster like a hurricane. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's really interesting to see kind of through social media people's reactions to these conspiracy theories, like positive or negative, and kind of how they're getting the information and how they're considering what's going on. I want to go back to something you said way earlier about like FEMA itself, like response to this. And I was looking on their page a couple days ago, like on their website, and they've actually added a page on their website called Myth or Fact, misinformation about the FEMA disaster assistance. And it's really interesting. I think most of the time this is used just as like a Q&A for like people like how to, apply for assistance and things like that. One of the first ones on this website was actually like the myth was FEMA is running out of money, and then it like gives the fact and like this is like the response from the organization. And like as we go, it's getting very much um like one of them on there is like FEMA is spending disaster recovery funds on sheltering immigrants at the border. And then it gives like the fact behind that and saying like this is not true. And then it gives like, the official response from the administration. But it's very like interesting or from the agency. It's very
Yeah,
interesting to see like, what was once like a Q&A or like FAQ for the organization is now like we have to defend our positioning and defend our own work to be able to provide the same assistance that we've been providing.
yeah, I also heard about that as well. And the same PBS News report I was listening to. And again, I think it's 100% the right move.
Right.
Because although the conspiracy theories are surrounding FEMA, the fact that it's coming from them and they're saying, look, this stuff is false, will, in my opinion, restore trust in at least some people. And they are clearly putting out there, um, don't believe what you see on Twitter. If a
Yeah.
random person posted something that we're, trying to take away your house, it's probably not true. And here's
Yeah.
why. So I'm glad they're doing that. Any final thoughts on that?
No, I think what's really important is just the like kind of understanding the connection between like FEMA's work and like their actual work, like what they're actually doing, and um like the difference between that and how that's like what's coming off in these conspiracy theories is really important, and like knowing your information before sharing it, or before like spreading misinformation and things like that. I think it's really highlighted in this example.
I agree. The next thing we wanted to talk about is the election. So, as everybody knows, the election is on November 5th. And not to anyone's surprise, it's really crazy. Tensions are high. I mean, that's normal of elections in general, but especially this election during this time of social media, which isn't new. I'm just saying it has a big role in this election, and all of these things. And that's really vague. Talking about election disinformation is a very vague thing because there's tons of things we could talk about. Um, but first, I wanted to talk about some of the comparisons, um, differences and similarities to some disinformation we saw during the 2020 election. One of the biggest conspiracy theories or false information that resulted in a lot of tension was the idea or the conspiracy theory that around mail-in ballots and how they were fraudulent in some way or another. And while that was completely false, the difference I noticed is that this time around, it's like the theories have become even more crazy. And for, I think, somebody who pays attention and knows how to, understand what's fake and not fake, to me, they seem insane. Like, I don't know how anyone would believe some of these theories. And I'm not saying everybody on one side is believing these, but like there are a large number of people believing certain theories, conspiracy theories, I should say, that, a huge number of non-citizens are voting. That's not true. Or that personally, I'm in London right now and I voted from London, and there's been some conspiracy theories that people that like voting from abroad is not legal or is fraudulent. That's not the most popular conspiracy theory, but I have seen it being from here and kind of researching from that angle. Um, what do you think? Have you noticed differences from 2020 and now? What do you think the differences are? Do you agree that they've gotten more crazy and almost less believable? Do you think they're working better on certain people? What are your thoughts?
I think overall, like we just had a shift in political environment, like just in general, I think after the 2020 election, almost like right after the 2020 election, we had a really large shift in political environment. It's kind of stayed that way um in like through this election. But like overall, key factors that were important in 2020, I think, are less important now. Like in 2020 was what we thought would be the height of COVID. We didn't really know the impacts of it. We had a lot of misinformation surrounding like health and healthcare and medicine. Plug to our episode with Dr. Dean to talk about the misinformation and disinformation of medicine. But then now I feel like we still have some of that misinformation with medicine, but I think it's more now we're focusing on like world conflict. We have a lot of new like more recent worldly conflicts that have happened since that election. We have different factors that are top of mind in this like for voters, which I think is different. And I think that's going to shift, you know, the tactics of disinformation.
Yeah, I agree. It's very hard to navigate, even though I have been paying attention. And, we're both people who stay up to date. It's very hard to navigate. So I really like empathize with those people who are just now trying to get involved and they're trying to make their voice heard through voting and they may feel a little overwhelmed or a lot overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I understand them because um for I work with Voters of Tomorrow, and our big thing is just to get young people and everybody to vote, get them active. But then on the other hand, like we have to be mindful, like if someone's just now getting involved, it can be a lot to take in. Even,
True.
and I'm sure you can relate, like being a college student, I'll like be studying for something for a few days and then I'll try to catch up on what has gone on in the world over the past few days that I was studying. And it's like, whoa, it's massive. And on top of that, if you come face to face with false claims and trying to get your news from social media and you just see all of these bogus things, that can just throw you off even more. Another thing I wanted to mention, and this was happening in 2020 as well. Conspiracy theory, conspiracy theories, I've said that word too much now, surrounding poll workers and certain ideas that poll workers have malicious intent and like they want to change votes. how does that affect them when it comes to safety? And how does that affect people's trust in the system?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to like the FEMA workers, like as as the election's getting closer, like poll workers are, you know, I think, yeah, poll workers are like very much concerned for their safety. And like there's been articles that I've read and like everything about, like tactics that they've used and like preparing that they've done for November 5th. And um it's kind of sad that that's going to be necessary. I mean, you can't even like think of and hear about that and be like, wow, they're overreacting, because in reality, like it may be necessary, and it's a very like prevalent for and necessary for them to take these precautions.
Yeah, definitely.
Next, we're going to talk about AI and its impact on how people view the news.
So before we get into anything else regarding I wanted to mention one example surrounding the hurricane and FEMA response that we talked about earlier, hurricanes, I should say. There was, and this isn't really surrounding the FEMA response, but I mentioned how certain, whether that's, Russian state-backed accounts or individuals spreading disinformation. I wanted to mention this. I'm not sure if you can see the image. Maybe I can upload it on the video, but the image is of a flooded Disney World, and it was posted by RIA, which is a state-owned Russian news agency and or news outlet, and this was showing Disney World flooded as a result of the hurricanes. However, it was found later that the images are fake and likely generated by AI. And what does this do? Of course, it causes people to become more upset and more angry, and possibly they can tie it back to the FEMA response conspiracy theories. And this is just an example I want to provide. There's another image I stumbled upon, and I'm not saying this is from a specific country or person because I'm not sure where it was from, and I don't have it pulled out right now, but it was yet another image that was put into circulation of a girl crying on, if I'm remembering correctly, it was some sort of like kayak or something, and it was showing the flooding and the devastating effects. However, this image was also AI generated too. And it could have been that the person who generated this photo, apologies for the honking, um, didn't mean to say this was true. However, it was put into circulation, people were upset, and any image that is fake, even though, you might be saying, well, yeah, the effects were bad, so that image isn't really adding anything. And in my opinion, it is, because whatever is out there, if it's fake, it will cause people to become more emotional or more upset. And it might be based on a fake image, such as that one. And those are just two examples surrounding the hurricane issue. There's also the matter of deep fakes, such as, if somebody like takes someone's face or voice, like it has me saying something crazy and it looks realistic, and people might believe it. What is your take on deep fakes and how that might affect um maybe the election, the current news cycle, or really anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think deepfakes are really um prevalent in this election, and I think going forward, especially as we kind of navigate regulations surrounding AI, and like what does that look like? Deepfakes in general, or AI generated photos in general, are going to play a large role in this election. We have seen like, the like AI generated like Taylor Swift endorsement. I don't know if you saw that. Um, and like how does that impact as well? Like the kind of not only like in her fan base, like that whole like actually who are people supporting, but also just people's view of AI in general. It's hard to draw the line between like using AI for a positive use and then negative, like using it for mis and disinformation. And I think that's getting harder and harder to balance, like harder and harder to draw a line between. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned AI use for good versus bad, because I think it was on one of our previous episodes, if I'm not mistaken, where we talked about how, yes, AI is causing a lot of people to believe things that are fake, but there are also AI systems being developed that will detect disinformation and misinformation and even detect that sort of information that was made from AI, which is very important. And I think me and a lot of other people, like I tend to be that type of person that's not, super pessimistic or saying that we shouldn't explore this technology, but I'm always like, oh dear gosh, like,
Yeah,
oh, I'm not sure about AI. Oh, it's gonna cause so many issues. However, like the truth is, it's here, and I can't be unrealistic and say, oh, just don't talk about it. So seeing
right.
certain positive developments are really good. And that can help us with even not non-AI related issues like, human generated disinformation.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and yeah, what you mentioned with Taylor Swift and other people being impacted by it, it's very interesting, but also scary. Um, I have no other specific examples on that. Um, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else that you want to talk about?
I think in general, yeah, like I said, like regarding AI specifically, like understanding that like there is, positive and negative uses for AI, and like you said, and not all AI, I guess, is like corresponds to the circulation of information in general. Like AIs can be used to detect like cancer and like to detect and be used in medicine and things like that. Like artificial intelligence is something that can be used in a positive manner. And one thing that, we're not trying to do on here is to like turn people away from
Right.
AI or turn people away from consuming information. Um, just knowing the differences between the two and being able to interpret them in a way that is beneficial and true.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the advice that I would have for people when it comes to AI and information that's possibly from AI is the same, even if we weren't talking about AI. It would be to, fact check your sources, see if there are other, for example, if you see some news report that sparks some big emotion, make sure there are other sources reporting on it, other credible sources reporting on it. And that's the same thing I would say for even, non-AI related issues.
Mhm.
So, like you said, there are a lot of good uses for AI, and like while it changes a lot because it can become much easier to produce false information, it doesn't change the basic things you should still be doing, which I
Right.
suppose we can view that as a good thing. As long as you have those basic skills, you can still attempt to decipher whether or not an information is false slash made by AI. So yeah, and I think from everything we talked about, some of it can sound really scary, such as, deep fakes or foreign influence in our information. But end of the day, if you're making sure you don't believe everything you see, especially on social media, if you're cross-checking with different sources and encouraging everybody else to do the same, I have high hopes, especially like kids these days,
It's
including us, the adults, everybody these days, but especially like I've noticed in young kids, like similarly to what we discussed in a previous episode, like they ask, "Oh, is that AI? What if that's AI?" Which is really good. So I do have high hopes. I don't want to be super pessimistic. I genuinely do believe that as long as we continue to educate the next generation and other generations as well, that you know the end of information or whatever isn't coming anytime soon. Like we'll
yeah.
still be able to understand what's real, what's not, and be able to produce solid reports and have people consume solid reports of the whole cycle.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and when it comes to the election, if I'm assuming people who are watching are following it closely, should just make sure to relax because yes, there's a lot that you can do, such as voting, encouraging people to vote, becoming involved, encouraging people to not believe the first thing they see, because we all know elections are a huge time for disinformation. But at the end of the day, like take time for yourself too, because I know how it feels to become overly focused on it. I'm sure everybody these days does know how that feels. So, yeah, just my advice. Take time for yourself, while following all the other advice.
Thank you all for listening and or watching.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.